air at Rechlin Air Base carried a kind of restless pride. It was 1940, and the German Luftwaffe believed itself unmatched in the skies. Every pilot who walked across that tarmac wore confidence like armor, their eyes narrow with certainty that no enemy could rival their machines, not the French, not the Poles, and certainly not the British. Captain Hans Voss, one of the Luftwaffe's most skilled test pilots, had spent months testing prototypes that promised faster climbs, sharper turns, and cleaner kills. He believed in German engineering the way a priest believed in God. The Messerschmitt Bf 109 was his altar, and he'd risked his life countless times to prove its worth. But on a grey morning in late October, a rumor rippled through the base. A British fighter had been captured almost intact near Calais. Some said it had landed by mistake. Others whispered it had simply run out of fuel. No one knew the truth, but the word Spitfire passed between mechanics like a secret spell. By noon, Hans stood before it. The aircraft sat in the hangar under heavy guard, its sleek curves unlike anything he had seen. Its wings stretched gracefully, the edges rolling like a bird's feathers rather than slicing like a blade. The fuselage gleamed in pale silver-green paint, still marked with British insignia. It looked alive, as if it might take flight just to spite them all. "Is this it?" Hans asked, stepping closer. Colonel Reinhardt, the test division's overseer, nodded. "Captured near Dunkirk. The British call it the Spitfire. We're to study it. Flight characteristics, design, engine response. You'll take her up tomorrow." Hans circled the plane, his boots echoing softly on the concrete floor. "It looks delicate," he said, "like something built for beauty, not battle." The colonel's lips twitched. "That's what the British want us to think, but our reports suggest it outclimbs the 109 at low altitude. Some pilots claim they can't shake it once it's behind them." Hans smirked. "Then they weren't good pilots." Still, as he ran his gloved hand along the Spitfire's wing, he felt something unsettling. The metal seemed smoother than the German alloys he was used to. The rivets were flush, the seams tighter, the balance of form and function unnervingly elegant. Even the cockpit canopy curved in a way that seemed almost artistic. That night, he couldn't sleep. The thought of flying an enemy's plane haunted him. It felt almost sacrilegious, as if he were about to betray his own nation's pride. Yet, deep inside, there was excitement. What if the stories were true? What if the British had built something beyond their own understanding? The next morning dawned cold and silent. Mechanics fueled the plane with captured Allied fuel, adjusting instruments to German readings. Hans suited up in his thick flight jacket, the Luftwaffe eagle gleaming on his chest. The other pilots gathered around, half jeering, half curious. "Bring it back in one piece," one joked. "Or don't," another muttered. "Let it crash, it's an enemy, after all." Hans said nothing. He climbed into the cockpit and froze. The controls were strange, familiar in shape, yet smoother, more ergonomic. The seat fit him perfectly, as though the plane itself wanted him there. The Merlin engine growled when he primed it, a deep, confident sound unlike the sharp snarl of the German Daimler-Benz engines. "Cleared for takeoff," came Reinhardt's voice over the radio. Hans took a breath, pushed the throttle forward, and felt the aircraft come alive beneath him. It moved with grace, not aggression, almost like it wanted to fly. The wheels lifted off, and suddenly, the world dropped away. Within seconds, he realized something was wrong, or rather, something was to right. The Spitfire didn't fight him. It responded to his every touch, rolling, climbing with a fluidity no German plane possessed. There was no mechanical lag, no stubborn vibration. It was as if he were wearing the machine, or perhaps, as if the machine were flying him. When he landed 20 minutes later, every face in the hangar turned toward him. He pulled off his goggles, eyes wide, skin pale. "Well," Reinhardt demanded. Hans stared at the Spitfire as if it were a ghost. "It shouldn't be possible," he said quietly. "No plane should fly like that." He looked up, his voice trembling with something close to awe. "I don't believe it's real." The hangar buzzed with tension the next morning. Word had spread like wildfire across the base. Captain Hans Voss had flown the captured British fighter and returned shaken, speechless almost. Some claimed the Spitfire had bewitched him. Others joked that it was British propaganda built with fairy dust. But beneath the laughter lay curiosity and fear. Hans stood by the plane again, this time joined by two fellow test pilots, Kurt Meyer and Otto Lehmann. Both were veterans, men who had spent hundreds of hours testing every German prototype. They trusted numbers, not feelings. And they didn't believe a British machine could humble the Luftwaffe. "So," Kurt said, circling the Spitfire with folded arms, "you're saying it flies better than the 109? Hans didn't look at him. "It doesn't fly better," he said slowly. "It flies different. It feels alive." Otto chuckled. "Alive? You've been breathing too much aviation fuel, Hans." But Reinhardt, the colonel, wasn't laughing. "You two will confirm it," he said. "Each of you will take it up today. Record everything: climb rate, roll speed, energy loss, stall response. No tricks. I want cold numbers." The mechanics checked every bolt, refueled the plane, and adjusted the instruments for the next flight. When Kurt climbed in, he gave Hans a mocking grin. "Watch how a real pilot handles British craft." The Spitfire roared again. the sound deeper and more resonant than the clipped growl of the German engines. It rolled down the runway and lifted smoothly, as though weightless. Within minutes it was a silver streak against the gray clouds. Hans and Otto stood watching from the ground, shielding their eyes. The plane moved with a grace that made their stomachs twist. Tight turns, effortless climbs, impossible dives. It looked more like a living creature than a machine of war. When Kurt landed 20 minutes later, he didn't joke. He climbed down slowly, eyes unfocused, his flight gloves trembling slightly. Reinhardt met him halfway. "Report," the colonel said. Kurt hesitated. "It responds before you think," he said. "You touch the stick, and it moves. You don't fight it. You become part of it." The roll rate, I couldn't believe it. "It feels supernatural." Otto laughed nervously. "You two sound like children who found a magic carpet." Reinhardt pointed at him. "Then you fly it next." Otto's grin faltered, but pride drove him forward. He climbed in, adjusted his harness, and took off. For 10 minutes, everything looked normal. Then, without warning, the Spitfire performed a rapid vertical climb, a maneuver few planes could survive without stalling. The German officers gasped. "She stalled," someone shouted, but it didn't. The Spitfire shot up, paused, then rolled gracefully into a dive, cutting through the air like a falcon. Even the ground crew fell silent. When Otto landed, he tore off his helmet and walked straight past them, muttering under his breath. Hans caught his arm. "What did you see?" Otto looked at him, his expression pale. "It doesn't obey the same rules," he said. "Every time I expected it to fight back, it didn't. Every time I thought it would shake, it smoothed itself out. It's unnatural." Reinhardt nodded grimly. "Then it's not just you, Hans. There's something the British discovered that we haven't." For days, the engineers swarmed the Spitfire. They measured its curves, dismantled its wings, studied its propeller angles. They found subtle things, the elliptical wing shape that reduced drag, the perfect weight balance, the way the engine's torque matched the airframe's rhythm. Each discovery chipped away at their confidence in German superiority. Hans began to fly it daily, comparing it to the 109. Every time he switched back, the Messerschmitt felt crude, heavy, mechanical, a fine weapon, yes, but heartless. The Spitfire, in contrast, seemed built for emotion, for instinct. It was the difference between a weapon and a dance partner. One evening, Hans sat in the hangar alone, staring at the Spitfire under a dim lamp. The others had gone, but he stayed behind, his gloved hand resting on the smooth wing. He whispered to himself, "How did they build you?" He thought of the British pilot who had once flown it, maybe a young man like himself, who had fought, climbed, and turned with joy in this very cockpit. For the first time, Hans felt something strange, not hatred for the enemy, but respect. Maybe even envy. He didn't notice Reinhardt watching him from the shadows. Later that night, the colonel called him into his office. "Berlin wants reports," Reinhardt said. "They're eager to know how a British plane could match our designs." Hans hesitated. "If I tell them the truth, they won't believe me." "Then tell them anyway," Reinhardt said. "Because I don't believe it either, and I saw it with my own eyes." Outside, the Spitfire gleamed under the moonlight, quiet and proud, as if listening to their disbelief, as if it knew something the Germans didn't. By the time the engineers from Berlin arrived, Rechlin Air Base felt less like a fortress of confidence and more like a church full of doubters. The rumors had reached the high command that the British had built a fighter so refined it made even Germany's best pilots question their faith in their machines. The engineers came in black cars, stiff in their long coats, their faces gray and humorless. They spoke little to the pilots. Instead, surrounding the Spitfire with clipboards, rulers, and measuring instruments, they took photographs, traced the wings, even removed small panels to study the rivet patterns. Hans stood nearby, watching them like vultures around a wounded animal. He felt protective of the plane now, as if it was something sacred. "Captain Voss," said one of the engineers, a tall, thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, "you've flown it more than anyone. Tell us, what makes it so remarkable?" Hans hesitated. "It isn't one thing," he said finally. "It's how everything feels when you fly it. The controls, the weight, the way the engine breathes. You think, and it reacts. It's not like the Messerschmitt, which you must wrestle. This one, it understands you." The engineer smirked faintly. "Machines do not understand, Captain, they obey physics." Hans shrugged. "Then perhaps the British understand physics better than we do." The room went silent. The engineer's smile vanished. "Careful what you imply," he said softly. "Our Reich leads the world in design." But Hans didn't respond. He simply turned back to the Spitfire, running his fingers along its cool metal skin. That afternoon, the engineers began to dismantle it piece by piece, the cowling first, then the engine mounts, then the wings. The Merlin engine sat exposed, its polished parts gleaming even under the oil stains. One of the mechanics muttered, "It's too clean, too balanced, almost elegant." Reinhardt approached Hans later, his face tight with frustration. "Berlin wants to copy it," he said. "They think they can reproduce the Spitfire's design within months." Hans looked doubtful. "You can't copy a soul," Colonel Reinhardt frowned. "What do you mean?" "The Spitfire wasn't made by committees. Hans said. It was crafted. You can see it in the curves, the symmetry, the thought behind every inch. It wasn't built to dominate, it was built to fly. Reinhardt stared at him for a long moment. You sound almost admiring of the enemy. Hans's lips tightened. I admire truth, sir, even if it comes with a British insignia. Over the next week, Hans continued to fly the Spitfire under controlled conditions. The engineers recorded everything: airspeed, altitude, turn radius, control pressures, but their numbers couldn't capture what Hans felt in his gut. The plane seemed to anticipate his movements, a living extension of his will. One evening, while the engineers were arguing over blueprints, Kurt approached Hans. They hate you, he said quietly. Hans frowned. Who? The ones from Berlin? You embarrassed them. They can't stand that a British design might be better than ours. They'll twist your words to make sure you're the problem, not the plane. Hans sighed. Then let them. I didn't build it. I only flew it. But the tension grew. The more the Spitfire proved itself, the more the German pride cracked. Some whispered that British craftsmanship must have been aided by spies stealing German designs, others that the plane was an accident, a fluke that couldn't be repeated. One night, Hans found Reinhardt drinking alone in his office. The colonel looked weary, his medals glinting under the low light. You know, Reinhardt said, I spent years believing the Germans would rule the skies forever. Then I watched you fly that thing. He took a sip. It makes me question everything I thought I knew. Hans nodded slowly. It made me question what it means to be a pilot. Reinhardt glanced up. Explain. When I flew our machines, I felt powerful, like I was conquering the air. But when I fly the Spitfire, I feel free. It's not about dominance, it's about harmony. Like the plane doesn't want to fight, it wants to dance. Reinhardt gave a bitter smile. Beautiful words, Hans. Dangerous ones, too. Outside in the hangar, the engineers continued their dissection through the night. The Spitfire sat under harsh white lights, its heart laid bare. Hans couldn't shake the feeling that they were killing something by studying it, stripping away its spirit in the name of imitation. As he turned to leave, he caught one last glimpse of the silver plane, now lifeless, its once proud wings resting on the cold floor. He whispered to himself, almost in mourning, they'll never understand it. And somewhere deep inside, he wondered perhaps they weren't meant to.